So we're going to continue with the Hebrew water boy. Just close up with the Hebrew water boy. Now, child labor, especially after the time of the Amu, the Hyksos, the Amalekites invasion, these foreign tribes, these non-native Egyptians, child labor was common. You understand? Was commonly used as another means to persecute. You understand? Another means to downpress the beta Israel in Egypt. Now, the boy shown above is about 15 years old. Now, what's curious about this boy that's shown, which is about roughly 15 years old, unlike Egyptian boys and youth of his age, this Hebrew will eventually grow a full beard. And if you look at it, he has a little goatee. His little goatee. See his peasy head? And a little goatee right there. You see his complexion? This is the Israelite. This is the Hebrew right here. Let's move on to young Hebrews gathering grapes. I mean, look at their hairstyle. Look at their features. These are Hebrews. These are Beta Israel. These are our people. This is the proof, and this is the evidence. Now, some would say, oh, this is just Egyptians. We're going to prove to you that they're just not Egyptians. Exodus, or Rit Zezat 1 and 14 said, and in all manner of service in the field, all their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. In other words, they made the Beta Israel after that new king arose who did not know Joseph. He did not know Im-hotep. He did not know the Hebrews. They didn't have any respect for those foreigners who took over Egypt, had no sort of love for the native people, and the native people had no sort of love for them. That's why the Hyksos are called an ignoble race. You understand? Like some really low down, dirty niggers. But not niggers in the sense of black, but you know what I'm saying. And what's interesting is that as we trace these people through time, we find these people in time come down to the very same peoples who participated in the transatlantic Ethiopic ocean slave trade. Their descendants doing the same thing that their fathers did. Yehoshua HaMoshiach, he said it. He said that you do the deeds of your fathers and that you approve of these deeds. And the deeds your fathers did, you do. So see, we judge the tree by the fruit. Now these Beta Israel children are roughly about 10 years old. They worked in the fields of the nationalized Egyptians, who were really, in true identity, they were foreign conquerors. They were Hyksos, Amu, Amalekites, and the rest of them, our enemies, as their parents labored in the brick pits. So as we saw the earlier picture and painting, where the older ones were working in the brick pits, you understand, in the brick masonry, the younger ones were either water boys or gatherers of grapes, as it says in Exodus 1 and 14, and all manner of service in the field. All their service when they made them serve was with rigor. Their days off depended on which of the many Egyptian, native Egyptian, but mostly the foreign deities that were dressed up like Egyptians. Because if you study Egypt, you'll find out that Egypt had some original gods. You understand? And when you study the attributes of these gods, there's a link with the Hebrew God. But then as you study furthermore, as other conquerors came in, foreign gods were brought in and dressed up in Egyptian garb. But their identities clearly show that they were not native Kamite or Shemite deities. They were foreign deities. Now the days that the Beta Israel had off, it all depended on which of the many Egyptianized foreign deities their masses worshipped. So if their masses worship a certain Egyptianized foreign deity, you understand, since they didn't know Joseph, they didn't know the true God, if their masses worshipped on this particular day, then you know what? The Hebrews would have the day off. Sounds a lot like what goes on today, doesn't it? President's Day and Lincoln's birthday and this a day and that a day and so forth, and your lives revolve around it because you're in spiritual Egypt and you don't know who you be, you don't know yourself as a Beta Israel. Now let's move on to something else. Well, another set of pictures. Here are the Hebrews. Here's a picture of the Hebrews, a painting of the Hebrews said to be entering Egypt. Now remember I say these dates are so-called approximate dates, but we have to really question the dates. You understand? This is a little more detailed study. Some of you already know that a lot of these dates that the Europeans and the Anglo-Americans and other Gentiles give us can't really be trusted because they're trying to measure from today from their foreign rulership. They're trying to measure, you understand, and they're trying to measure by arbitrary means. So one historian will say he thinks these dates are push the date up, others will push the date back, and all this confusion, and then people would say, well, who knows? But the evidence is when you start to read the pictures, like reading the hieroglyphs. It's telling a story. Here are the Hebrews entering Egypt, some say approximately 1877 BCE. And we put a question mark next to these dates. You understand? We can tell more of what is happening based on what the story is telling us, and putting that story, that composite story, together with other evidences. But this is the first half of what's known as the caravan scene. Now this is what is known as the second half of what is called the caravan scene. Now it's kind of interesting when you look at it because there's a picture in here, it's a determiner in the hieroglyphs, and when you look at it, it seems to have that face that everybody says looks like Obama with the big ears. You see that determiner right there when you read towards the characters. That means you would read it this way. You would read it this way towards the character. And you see at the end is a bound Shemite. It seems like a bound Shemite up there, which is very interesting. But we'll get into that. But notice something. Notice the design of the clothing. Notice the design of the clothing. Now you know how much Negroes like their clothing, like their particular style, have their own style. You understand? And what is kind of interesting too is how the Shemites or the Israelites, the Hebrews, are shown. You understand? And even the particular animals. Now notice the clothing. Unlike the Hebrews, the Egyptians basically wore plain white linen. Remember Joseph and his multicolored robe? You remember that story about Joseph and the multicolored robe? Now, look at the wall paintings and you see how the Egyptians represented themselves and how the Egyptians represented others. This is also a beautiful picture. Now, one thing I want to say about this picture, we have this in a couple of different versions of the picture. And we really want to know, what does the real color look like? Some of the pictures we see, the color is lighter. Some of the picture we see, the color is darker. But when you look at the features, if you focus on the features of these brothers are Hebrews. They are Hebrew men. Historically speaking, these Hebrews would eventually become the rulers of Egypt. Historically speaking. Then they would become the slaves of Egypt. You understand? They would rise very high and they would fall down very low. And this is interesting to talk about at this particular time, seeing we have our first so-called African-American president, who does have Hebrew blood, but remember, the Edomites are also Hebrews. And according to Jewish law, it's not so much they say what your father is, they say it's what your mother is. So, but just think about this. The Hebrews would come in, these Hebrews, they would become rulers of Egypt, then they would become the slaves of Egypt. And once again, we're given an approximate date, which is roughly 1870 BCE. Now, Yosef, the son of Israel, Bain Israel, became the most powerful man in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself, second only to the king of Egypt, the Sutenbite or the Sutenbat himself, according to Genesis 41, verses 39 to 45, which is very interesting, especially when we break down the name from the Hebrew Ethiopic and then put it back in the hieroglyphs and find out exactly who Yosef was and who the Pharaoh and the rulers of Egypt at that time, to put it in a historical context. But some say this period introduced what is called and known the Hyksos period in Egyptian history.